In the vast expanse of the Galactic Council chambers, where beings from 1,000 worlds gathered to decide the fate of civilizations, one name was about to shatter everything they thought they knew about power, fear, and the supposedly primitive species from the third rock orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The humans have been the galaxy's running joke for 3 decades. A young species barely capable of interstellar travel, relegated to the furthest corners of civilized space. Their representative, a seemingly ordinary young man named Marcus Chun, had endured countless sessions of mockery from species that had mastered the stars when Earth was still cooling from its formation. But today, something was different. Today, the Supreme Hunter, the galaxy's most feared assassin, a being whose very existence was whispered about in the darkest corners of space, would speak a name that would make every alien in that chamber realize they had gravely underestimated the children of Earth. What they were about to learn would change everything. Sometimes the most dangerous predator in the galaxy was the face of prey. Marcus Chun adjusted his simple black suit as he walked through the towering corridors of the Galactic Council station. The metallic walls stretched impossibly high above him, designed to dwarf visitors and remind them of their place in the cosmic hierarchy. Holographic displays showed the emblems of the 12 major galactic powers, each one representing civilizations that had conquered star systems before humans had even discovered fire. The young human diplomat carried himself with quiet dignity despite the whispers and pointing that followed him wherever he went. At 28 years old, Marcus was the youngest representative in the Council's history, a fact that the alien delegates never let him forget. His dark hair was neatly combed, his brown eyes alert but weary from 3 years of constant ridicule. As he approached the main chamber, a group of Vorthak diplomats blocked his path. The insectoid aliens stood nearly 8 feet tall, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lights. Their compound eyes fixed on Marcus with undisguised contempt. "Look what crawled out of the Sol system," hissed Ambassador Zekthar, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "The monkey has returned for another beating." Marcus stopped walking, but didn't step back. He had learned early in his diplomatic career that showing fear only encouraged more aggressive behavior. "Ambassador Zekthar," he said with a slight nod, "I hope your hive worlds are prospering." The Vorthak's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "At least the monkey learns manners. Perhaps there is hope for your primitive species after all." He leaned closer, his breath smelling of sulfur and decay. "Tell me, little human, what grand illusions will your people present today? Another request for territory in civilized space? Perhaps you wish to join the adults at the big table?" Before Marcus could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. "The humans think they deserve respect simply for achieving faster-than-light travel," said Counselor Veltar of the Hegemony. The reptilian being slithered forward on her serpentine lower body, her scaled hide shifting from green to amber as her mood darkened. "They have no understanding of what it means to truly rule the stars." More delegates began to gather, drawn by the familiar sport of humiliating the human representative. There was Commander Nix of the Silicon Collective, his crystalline form refracting light into rainbow patterns across the walls. The gaseous entity known as Whisper of Distant Stars floated in a containment suit, its thoughts translated into mechanical speech. Even the normally peaceful Zenithian monks had stopped their meditation to observe the spectacle. "I remember when your species first made contact," wheezed Nix, his voice resonating through speakers embedded in his mineral body. "Your ships were so crude, so laughably primitive. Metal boxes held together with chemical propulsion. We thought it was a joke." "It was a joke," added Whisper, its translated voice emotionless and cold. "Your entire species is a joke. A cosmic accident that stumbled into the stars through sheer luck." Marcus felt the familiar weight of their words, but he had endured worse. "Every species had to start somewhere," he said calmly. "Even yours." This comment drew a chorus of derisive laughter from the assembled aliens. Zekthar's mandibles spread wide in a terrifying grin. "Start somewhere? Boy, when your ancestors were still learning to make fire, my people had already conquered 17 star systems. When you were drawing on cave walls, The hegemony was establishing trade routes across the galaxy. You're not starting late, you are starting never. The crowd of aliens pressed closer, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of mockery. Marcus could smell the different atmospheric requirements of each species. The methane that Nyx preferred, the high-sulfur air that sustained the Vorthack, the ozone-rich mixture that the hegemony breathed. Being surrounded by so many different biologies should have been fascinating, but right now it only served to emphasize how alone he was. Perhaps we should assign them a few uninhabitable worlds to play with, suggested Veltar, her forked tongue tasting the air. Dead rocks where they can pretend to build an empire without disturbing their betters. Even that would be too generous, Nyx replied, his crystalline form pulsing with what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of laughter. Give them a single moon. Let them practice governing that for a few thousand years. The Zenithian monks, despite their reputation for wisdom and peace, added their own cruel observations. Elder Mordun stepped forward, his forearms clasped in a gesture that might have looked meditative to an outsider, but Marcus recognized as condescending superiority. The humans lack the mental capacity for true galactic citizenship, the monk said in his melodious voice. Their brains are too simple, their lifespans too short, their understanding too limited. They see only in 3 dimensions while we think in 17. Their military is even more pathetic than their diplomacy, laughed Commander Thraxis of the Warcast, a massive being whose red skin bore the ritual scars of 1,000 battles. They still use projectile weapons, chemical explosives. They think nuclear fusion is advanced technology. The laughter grew louder and more cruel. Marcus had heard all of these insults before, had endured 3 years of being treated like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. But today felt different. Today, the mockery seemed more vicious, more personal. Perhaps word had reached them about humanity's recent request for expanded territory rights. Or maybe they had heard about the new human colonies that were slowly but steadily expanding outward from Earth. "I've always wondered," said Veltar, her voice taking on a dangerously sweet tone, "what would happen if we simply removed the human presence from the galaxy? Would anyone notice? Would anyone care?" The chamber fell silent except for the various breathing apparatus and life support systems. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, recognizing the shift from casual cruelty to something more serious. Veltar wasn't just insulting humanity anymore. She was suggesting genocide. The hegemony's fleets could accomplish such a task in a matter of days, she continued, her scales shifting to a deep red color that Marcus knew indicated aggression. A few plasma bombardments, some targeted strikes on their industrial centers. It would be quick, efficient, and final. The collective would not object, added Nyx, his crystalline form now pulsing with harsh, angular patterns. Humans consume resources that could be better used by more advanced species. Marcus felt sweat forming on his forehead, but his voice remained steady when he spoke. The Galactic Council has strict laws against genocide. The Covenant of Species Protection specifically, laws written by the strong to protect the weak, interrupted Zekthar. But what happens when the weak become inconvenient? When they take up space that could be used for expansion by their betters? The circle of aliens closed tighter around Marcus. He could see the hunger in their eyes, the barely contained violence that lurked beneath their civilized facades. These were predator species, every one of them, who had climbed to the top of their respective food chains through centuries of warfare and conquest. Humanity, in their eyes, was nothing more than prey that had somehow learned to speak. "Of course," said Veltar, her voice now openly threatening. "Such actions would require unanimous consent from the Council. Even one vote against would prevent any administrative solutions to the human problem." Marcus understood the implied threat. They were telling him that humanity's survival depended on his behavior, on his willingness to accept whatever scraps they chose to throw his way. One word of defiance, one moment of backbone, and they would find a way to justify wiping out his entire species. But as he looked into the hostile faces surrounding him, Marcus felt something unexpected rising in his chest. Not fear, not submission, but a cold, calculating anger. These aliens saw humans as weak, as helpless, as insignificant. They had no idea what they were really dealing with. "I understand your position," Marcus said quietly, his voice so calm that several of the aliens leaned closer to hear him. "You see humanity as a threat to your established order. You fear what we might become if given the chance to grow." The aliens laughed again, but there was less certainty in it this time. Something in Marcus's tone had changed, becoming harder and more confident. "Fear." Zekthar's mandibles clicked rapidly. "We do not fear monkeys, boy. We simply recognize pests when we see them." Marcus nodded slowly, as if accepting the insult, but his eyes never left the Vorthak ambassador's face. "I've been representing humanity in this council for 3 years, he said. 3 years of listening to your jokes, your threats, your casual discussions of extermination. 3 years of being told that my species is worthless, primitive, beneath your notice." He paused, looking around the circle of hostile aliens with something that might have been pity. 3 years of letting you believe you were safe. The quality of silence that followed was different from before. Where there had been aggressive mockery, now there was confusion and the first stirrings of unease. Something in the young human's demeanor had shifted, and the predator species around him were beginning to sense that they might have misjudged their prey. "Safe." Veltar's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "What could we possibly have to fear from?" The conversation was interrupted by an announcement that echoed through the station's communication system. The voice that spoke was artificial, but it carried an authority that made every being in the corridor freeze in place. "Attention, all delegates. The Supreme Hunter has requested immediate access to the council chambers. All proceedings are suspended until further notice." The effect of this announcement was immediate and dramatic. Aliens who had been laughing and joking seconds before now looked around nervously, their various forms of body language all expressing the same emotion: terror. The Supreme Hunter was a legend throughout the galaxy, a being whose very existence was debated in academic circles and whispered about in the darkest corners of space. Some said it was an ancient AI left over from a long-dead civilization. Others believed it was a collective consciousness made up of the galaxy's greatest killers. A few insisted it was something else entirely, something that existed outside the normal understanding of life and death. What everyone agreed on was this: when the Supreme Hunter took an interest in something, that something usually ceased to exist very quickly afterward. "Why would the Hunter come here?" whispered one of the Zenithian monks, his 4 arms trembling. "Perhaps someone has violated the ancient treaties," suggested Nyx, his crystalline form dim with fear. Marcus watched the aliens' reactions with interest. These were the beings who had spent the last hour discussing the casual extermination of his entire species, and now they were trembling at the mere mention of a name. It was illuminating to see how quickly the predators became prey when faced with something truly dangerous. The corridor began to empty as delegates hurried away to prepare for whatever was coming. But as they fled, Marcus noticed something strange. Several of them kept looking back at him with expressions he had never seen before. Not mockery, not condescension, but something that looked almost like fear. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus was left standing alone in the corridor, still wearing his simple black suit and carrying himself with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the confrontation. But now there was something else in his posture, something that suggested the young human diplomat might not be quite what he appeared to be. The Supreme Hunter was coming, and somehow, Marcus Chun didn't look surprised at all. The main council chamber was a marvel of galactic engineering, a massive sphere that could accommodate thousands of delegates while maintaining perfect acoustics and environmental controls for dozens of different species. Today, however, the chamber felt smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were pressing inward with anticipation and dread. Marcus took his assigned seat in the human delegation section, a small platform positioned far from the center of the chamber. The isolation was intentional. Another reminder of humanity's insignificant status in galactic politics. Around him, the other delegates whispered nervously in hundreds of different languages and communication methods. The central dais, normally reserved for the council president, remained empty. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on the main entrance, waiting for the arrival of a being that most of them had never seen and hoped they never would. Counselor Veltar slithered to her position, her scales still shifting between colors as her emotions fluctuated between fear and curiosity. "This is unprecedented," she hissed to her aide, a smaller hegemony operative whose scales were locked in a permanent pattern of anxiety. The Supreme Hunter has never directly interfaced with the Council before. Perhaps it seeks to establish formal diplomatic relations, the aide suggested hopefully. Veltar's laugh was bitter and short. The Supreme Hunter does not negotiate. It eliminates. The question is what has drawn its attention to this place. Across the chamber, the Vorthack delegation was having a similar conversation. Ambassador Zekthar's compound eyes were darting nervously around the room, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. "Check our recent activities," he ordered his staff. "Ensure we have violated no ancient protocols or forgotten treaties." The Hunter's judgment is swift and final. The Silicon Collective had gone almost completely dark, their crystalline forms dim, and their usual harmonic communications reduced to barely audible whispers. Even their ability to process information at superhuman speeds seemed overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was about to occur. Commander Thraxis of the Warcast sat rigid in his reinforced chair, his scarred red skin gleaming with perspiration. For a being who had personally led charges against fortified positions and faced down enemy fleets without flinching, the thought of encountering the Supreme Hunter clearly terrified him. His hands gripped his ceremonial weapons so tightly that the metal began to bend under the pressure. The Zenithian monks had arranged themselves in a complex meditation pattern, their forearms weaving through the air in an attempt to center their thoughts and achieve spiritual balance. But even their centuries of training could not completely mask their fear. Elder Mordun's usual serenity had cracked, revealing the very mortal terror that lurked beneath his enlightened facade. As the tension in the chamber continued to build, Marcus found himself studying the reactions of the various species around him. These were the beings who ruled the galaxy, who commanded fleets that could destroy star systems, and controlled resources beyond human comprehension. Yet all of them were reduced to frightened children by the mere prospect of the Supreme Hunter's arrival. The irony was not lost on him. An hour ago, these same beings had been discussing the casual extermination of humanity as if it were a minor administrative detail. Now they sat in mortal terror of something whose existence they barely understood. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, and every conversation stopped immediately. The massive doors of the main entrance began to iris open, their heavy materials retracting with mechanical precision. But instead of the dramatic entrance everyone expected, there was only silence. For long moments, nothing happened. The doorway remained open, but no figure emerged. No footsteps echoed through the chamber. No voice announced the hunter's arrival. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable, and several delegates began to shift nervously in their seats. Then, without any warning or fanfare, a figure simply stood in the center of the chamber. The Supreme Hunter was not what anyone had expected. Instead of the monstrous entity of legend, they saw what appeared to be a humanoid figure roughly 7 feet tall, wearing form-fitting armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The armor's surface was completely black, so dark that it created a disconcerting visual effect, as if a human-shaped hole had been cut out of reality itself. The hunter's face was hidden behind a featureless mask that showed no features, no expressions, nothing that could be used to gauge emotion or intent. Where eyes should have been, there were only 2 points of pale blue light that seemed to pierce through whatever they focused on. What was most unsettling was the complete absence of any detectable technology. The figure had appeared without using transporters, without any visible machinery, without even the basic life support systems that most species required for interstellar travel. They simply existed, standing perfectly motionless in the center of the chamber, radiating an aura of absolute and undeniable power. The silence continued for several more minutes as the hunter's gaze, if it could be called that, swept slowly around the chamber. When those blue points of light fixed on a delegate, that being seemed to shrink into themselves, as if trying to become invisible through sheer force of will. Finally, the Supreme Hunter spoke. The voice that emerged was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was the sound of stellar winds across empty space, of gravity wells bending reality, of the universe itself passing judgment. "I have come," the hunter said, and those 3 words carried more authority than all the fleets and armies in the galaxy, to discuss humanity. The reaction was immediate and electric. Every alien in the chamber turned to stare at Marcus, who sat calmly in his isolated section as if this were a perfectly normal occurrence. The young human diplomat showed no surprise, no fear, no confusion. He simply waited, his hands folded in his lap, and his expression neutral. Council President Morthike, an elderly Zenthari who had presided over the galaxy's government for 3 centuries, finally found the courage to speak. "Supreme Hunter," he began, his voice wavering despite his best efforts to maintain dignity, "we are honored by your presence. How may the council serve you?" The hunter's head turned with mechanical precision until those points of light were focused directly on the president. "You may listen," the voice replied with absolute finality. "And you may learn." The hunter then did something that sent a wave of shock through the entire chamber. It turned its back on the assembled delegates, showing a level of disrespect that was almost unthinkable in galactic politics, and walked slowly toward the human delegation section. With each step, the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. The hunter's movement was perfectly fluid, showing none of the mechanical stiffness that characterized most powered armor. Instead, it moved like a predator, like death itself, walking across the floor with casual, terrifying grace. When the hunter reached Marcus's section, it stopped directly in front of the young human. For a long moment, the 2 figures regarded each other, the most feared being in the galaxy and the supposedly insignificant representative of a primitive species. Then, the hunter did something that made every witness question their understanding of reality itself. It knelt. The Supreme Hunter, the entity that had never shown deference to anyone or anything, lowered itself to one knee before the human diplomat. The gesture was formal, respectful, and completely impossible according to everything the galaxy thought it knew about the mysterious figure. "Marcus," the hunter said, and for the first time there was something approaching warmth in that cosmic voice. "It has been too long." Marcus smiled, and reached out to place a hand on the hunter's shoulder. The contact should have been impossible. The hunter's armor had been described as being able to absorb energy weapons and deflect molecular disruptors. Yet Marcus's simple human hand rested on it, as if it were nothing more than fabric. "Hello, old friend," Marcus said quietly. "I was wondering when you'd decide to make an appearance." The gasps and exclamations that erupted from the assembled delegates were cut short when the hunter rose to its full height and turned back toward the center of the chamber. The blue lights that served as its eyes seemed brighter now, more intense, and when it spoke again, its voice carried an edge that made reality itself seem to shiver. "For too long," the hunter announced, "this council has operated under a fundamental misunderstanding. You have assumed that power comes from technology, from numbers, from the ability to destroy planets and conquer systems. You have looked at humanity and seen weakness because they lack your weapons, your fleets, your ancient knowledge." The hunter paused, letting its words sink in before continuing. "You have forgotten the most basic truth of existence. True power comes not from what you can destroy, but from what you can create. Not from how many you can kill, but from how many you can save. not from inspiring fear, but from earning respect. Ambassador Zekthar, somehow finding the courage to speak despite his terror, clicked his mandibles nervously. Supreme Hunter, we do not understand. The humans are primitive, young, barely capable of interstellar travel. What power could they possibly possess? The hunter's head turned toward the Vorthack delegate with mechanical precision. They possess the power that you lost long ago. Insect. They possess hope. They possess the ability to see beyond their current limitations and imagine something better. They possess the strength to stand against overwhelming odds not because they cannot lose, but because they refuse to surrender. The hunter began to move again, walking slowly around the chamber as it spoke. With each step, its presence seemed to fill the space more completely, until every delegate could feel the weight of its attention, even when it wasn't looking directly at them. When your species first encountered humanity, the hunter continued, you saw crude ships and primitive weapons. You failed to see the beings who had built those ships from nothing, who had climbed from a single world to the stars in less time than most of your species take to plan a single expansion. You saw weakness where you should have seen potential. Counselor Veltar's scales had shifted to a pale, sickly color that indicated extreme distress. But surely their lack of advanced technology, the hunter interrupted, and the word carried such contempt that several delegates physically recoiled. You worship at the altar of technology as if it were divine. You have confused the tools with the hands that wield them, the weapons with the warriors who bear them. The hunter stopped in front of the war-cast delegation, and Commander Thraxis visibly trembled as those blue lights focused on him. Tell me, warrior, the hunter said with deadly softness, what good is the most advanced weapon in the galaxy in the hands of a coward? What use is a fleet that runs from the first sign of real danger? Thraxis opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The hunter waited for a moment, then continued its circuit of the chamber. Humanity fights with primitive weapons because they are young, but they fight with the courage of their convictions, with the strength of their bonds, with the knowledge that some things are worth dying for. When was the last time any of you could say the same? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Around the chamber, delegates who had spent millennia conquering worlds and building empires found themselves unable to answer. When had they last fought for something beyond their own power? When had they last risked everything for an ideal rather than profit? The hunter stopped walking and stood once again in the center of the chamber. When it spoke next, its voice carried a finality that made the walls themselves seem to hold their breath. I have watched this galaxy for eons beyond your counting. I have seen species rise and fall, have witnessed the birth and death of civilizations that would make your empires look like children playing with toys. And in all that time, I have rarely seen anything that impressed me. Those blue lights swept across the assembled delegates one final time. Until now, the hunter turned back toward Marcus, who had been sitting quietly throughout the entire exchange. The humans have done something that none of you have managed in millions of years of existence, the hunter announced. They have surprised me. The implication of those words settled over the chamber like a crushing weight. The Supreme Hunter, the entity that had supposedly seen everything the galaxy had to offer, claimed to be surprised by humanity. What did that mean? What had humans done that could possibly impress a being of such cosmic power? Marcus stood up slowly, straightening his simple black suit with calm precision. As he did, something seemed to shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The isolated platform where he had been sitting no longer felt like a punishment or an insult. Instead, it suddenly seemed like the position of honor it had always been, separate from the crowd, elevated above the masses, standing apart in dignity and strength. When Marcus spoke, his voice carried across the chamber with perfect clarity, and for the first time, every delegate hung on his words. My friends, he said, and somehow the word friend sounded both sincere and slightly threatening. I think it's time we had a different conversation. Marcus walked down from his platform with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the absolute silence of the chamber. As he moved, Something fundamental seemed to shift in the room's dynamics. The young human who had been the target of mockery and threats just hours before now commanded the attention of every being present with an authority that needed no announcement or explanation. For 3 years, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space, I have sat in this chamber and listened to your stories. Tales of ancient conquests, of worlds brought to heel, of species bent to your will through superior technology and overwhelming force. You have spoken of humanity as if we were children stumbling around in a playground built by our betters. He paused at the edge of the central dais, close enough to the assembled delegates that they could see the subtle changes in his demeanor. The apologetic deference was gone, replaced by something that made several of the more predatory species unconsciously shift backward in their seats. You were right about one thing, Marcus continued with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. We are children compared to you, children playing in a playground. But you made one crucial error in your assessment. The hunter remained motionless, but somehow its presence seemed to radiate approval as Marcus spoke. The two figures, human and entity, created a tableau that was both beautiful and terrifying in its implications. You assumed, Marcus said, stepping onto the central dais with casual confidence, that because we were playing in your playground, it meant we had built nothing of our own. Ambassador Zekthar's mandibles clicked nervously as he tried to process what he was hearing. What do you mean, human? Your species controls a handful of systems at best. Your technology is centuries behind our weakest colonies. Marcus turned to face the Vorthack delegation, and several of them unconsciously leaned back as his gaze fixed on them. Tell me, Ambassador, how many species has the Vorthack Imperium eliminated over the course of your expansion? The question seemed innocent enough, but Zekthar hesitated before answering. What relevance does this have to how many? Marcus repeated, and this time there was steel in his voice that made the massive insectoid alien actually flinch. 17 major species, Zekthar admitted reluctantly, and perhaps 40 or 50 minor ones. It is the natural order of expansion. The strong survive, the weak perish. 17 major species, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. Billions upon billions of sentient beings, wiped from existence because they stood in your way. And you, Counselor Veltar? He turned to face the hegemony representative. How many has your empire consumed in its march across the stars? Very traditional approaches to galactic politics. He stopped walking and stood perfectly still in the center of the chamber, his simple black suit a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by the alien delegates. But somehow, in that moment, he was the most commanding presence in the room. Now let me tell you about humanity's approach, Marcus said, and his voice carried a quality that made every being in the chamber lean forward despite their fear. In the 37 years since we achieved faster-than-light travel, we have encountered 43 intelligent species. Some are more advanced than us. Many were less so. A few were barely beginning to understand that there was a universe beyond their homeworld. The hunter shifted slightly, the first movement it had made since kneeling before Marcus. Those blue lights seemed to pulse with anticipation. Of those 43 species, Marcus continued, we have eliminated exactly 0. We have absorbed exactly 0. We have conquered exactly 0. He paused, letting that fact sink in. Instead, we have offered trade agreements to 31 of them. We have provided medical assistance to 26. We have shared technology with 18. We have offered military protection to 12. A murmur ran through the chamber as delegates tried to process what they were hearing. Such behavior was completely contrary to everything they understood about galactic expansion and species interaction. Counselor Veltar found her voice first. That's impossible. No species expands through charity and weakness. You would be consumed by the first predator you encountered. Marcus smiled, and this time the expression carried a hint of genuine warmth. Weakness, Counselor? Let me ask you something. How many allies does the hegemony have? True allies, not conquered subjects or economic dependencies. How many species would willingly come to your aid if you're threatened? Veltar's scales shifted through several color combinations as she struggled with the question. The answer, Marcus could see, was clearly zero. The Vorthack Imperium commands through fear, Marcus continued, turning back to Zekthar. How many of your subject species love you? How many would mourn if your empire fell tomorrow? The insectoid ambassador's compound eyes darted around the chamber, seeking support that wasn't coming. The Warcast believes that strength comes from the ability to destroy, Marcus said to Thraxis. But, answer me this, what happens when you encounter something that cannot be destroyed? Something that grows stronger with each attack. Marcus walked back to the center of the dais and spread his arms wide, addressing the entire assembly. You see weakness where we see strength. You see primitiveness where we see potential. You see a handful of barely colonized systems where we see the foundation of something unprecedented in galactic history. The Hunter spoke for the first time since its arrival, its cosmic voice carrying perfect clarity. Show them, it said simply. Marcus nodded and reached into his jacket. Several of the more paranoid delegates tensed, clearly expecting some kind of weapon, but what he withdrew was nothing more threatening than a small, unremarkable datapad. This, he said, holding up the device, contains the current status of humanity's expansion into galactic civilization. He activated the display, and a holographic projection filled the center of the chamber. What the assembled delegates saw made no sense according to their understanding of interstellar politics. The display showed not conquest maps or resource extraction charts, but a complex network of trade routes, alliance agreements, cultural exchange programs, and mutual defense pacts. The Kalari were a pre-industrial species when we first encountered them, Marcus explained as the display zoomed in on a particular system. Their homeworld was dying due to volcanic activity. According to galactic law, they had no claims to advanced assistance since they couldn't pay for it. We evacuated their entire population, for billion beings, and helped them establish colonies on 3 different worlds better suited to their physiology. The display shifted to show another system. The Threnodai were under attack by raiders from the Outer Rim. Their technology was advanced enough to detect the threats, but not powerful enough to repel them. We provided military escorts for their trade routes and helped them establish defensive platforms around their homeworld. System after system appeared on the display, each one showing a different story of human assistance and cooperation. Species saved from extinction. Wars prevented through mediation. Trade disputes resolved through patient negotiation. Technologies shared freely rather than sold at exploitative prices. But here's the truly interesting part, Marcus said as the display pulled back to show the full scope of human diplomatic activity. Each of these species, grateful for our assistance, began offering aid to others. The Kalari, settled on their new worlds, developed advanced atmospheric processing techniques that they shared with struggling colonies. The Threnodai, secure in their systems, began providing escort services for other species' trade routes. The network of connections began to glow more brightly as Marcus continued. What you're seeing is not an empire built on conquest and fear. It's an alliance built on mutual respect and shared benefit. And it's growing. Commander Thraxis leaned forward in his chair, his scarred face showing confusion and concern. Growing how? Without weapons, without conquest, how does this alliance expand? Through something you've forgotten exists, Marcus replied. Choice. Every species that joins our network does so because they want to, not because they have to. Because they've seen what we offer and decided it's better than what they had before. The hunter moved again, stepping closer to the center of the dais. Tell them the numbers. Marcus. Marcus's smile widened. 3 years ago, when I first arrived at this council, humanity controlled 12 star systems with a combined population of 47 billion beings. Today, the Human Alliance controls 218 systems with a combined population of 1.6 trillion beings. The silence that followed was deafening. Several delegates began frantically operating their own data systems, trying to verify what they had just heard. The numbers were impossible according to everything they knew about galactic politics, but the evidence was right there in front of them. "You're lying," whispered Counselor Veltar, her scales now locked in a pattern of pure terror. No species could expand that rapidly without massive military campaigns. Our intelligence services would have detected such activity. "Your intelligence services," Marcus said with gentle amusement, "were looking for the wrong things. They were watching for fleet movements, weapons buildups, territorial declarations. They weren't watching for trade delegations, cultural exchanges, and humanitarian missions." Elder Mordun of the Zenithian monks spoke for the first time since the hunter's arrival, his four arms trembling as he gestured. "This changes everything. If what you claim is true, then humanity has built a power base that rivals any of the major galactic civilizations. And you did it under our noses." "Not under your noses," Marcus corrected. "Right in front of them. Every mission was openly declared. Every agreement was filed with the appropriate galactic authorities. Every action was completely legal according to existing interstellar law. You simply couldn't conceive that anyone would expand their influence through cooperation rather than conquest." The hunter's voice cut through the growing murmur of conversation like a blade through silk. "The galaxy has operated under the same principles for millions of years. The strong dominate the weak. Resources flow upward to those with the power to take them. Species expand through violence and intimidation." Those blue lights swept across the assembled delegates one by one. "Humanity has broken that cycle. They have proven that there is another way. A better way." President Morthike, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally found the courage to speak. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his ancient voice heavy with the weight of centuries. "Why reveal this now?" Marcus and the hunter exchanged a look, or what passed for a look given the entity's featureless mask. There was communication between them, some kind of understanding that transcended normal interaction. Because Marcus said finally, "The time for games is over. For 3 years, I've played the role of the bumbling primitive, the harmless representative of an insignificant species. I've endured your mockery, your threats, your casual discussions of genocide. I've watched you congratulate yourselves on your ancient wisdom while you repeated the same cycles of violence that have kept this galaxy in perpetual conflict." He gestured toward the holographic display, which still showed the vast network of human alliances. "But while you were laughing at us, we were building something new, something unprecedented. And now we're strong enough that we don't need to hide anymore." The implications of his words hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't been weak and struggling for acceptance. They had been quietly building the largest alliance in galactic history while their betters dismissed them as irrelevant. "The question now," Marcus continued, his voice carrying a note of finality, "is what happens next. Do you continue with the old ways, conquest, domination, the endless cycle of violence that has defined galactic civilization for eons? Or do you join us in building something better?" The chamber fell silent except for the various life support systems and the soft hum of electronics. Every delegate seemed to be weighing their options, trying to understand how dramatically the balance of power had shifted in the space of a single conversation. Finally, Ambassador Zekthar spoke, his mandibles clicking nervously. "And if we choose not to join your alliance? What then?" Marcus's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Then you continue as you always have," he said simply. "But you do so knowing that there's an alternative. And you do so knowing that every species you threaten, every world you conquer, every atrocity you commit, will be answered by those who believe there's a better way." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Humanity and their allies wouldn't attack the existing galactic powers, but they would defend their principles. And with the resources of 200 systems behind them, that defense would be formidable indeed. The hunter stepped forward one final time. "The old ways are ending," it announced with cosmic authority. "A new age begins now. You can be part of it, or you can be left behind by it. But you cannot stop it. As the entity's words echoed through the chamber, every delegate in attendance realized that they were witnessing a turning point in galactic history. The age of empires built on conquest and fear was coming to an end. The age of humanity had begun. The revelation of humanity's true influence sent shockwaves through the council chamber. But the real surprise was yet to come. As delegates whispered frantically among themselves, try to process the magnitude of what they had just learned, the Supreme Hunter began to change. The transformation started subtly. The absolute darkness of the Hunter's armor began to shift, becoming less of a void and more of a deep, star-flecked black. The featureless mask that had hidden the entity's face started to dissolve, not breaking apart, but simply fading away like morning mist. What emerged beneath made every being in the chamber question everything they thought they knew about the galaxy's most feared legend. The face that was revealed was human. Not partially human, not humanoid, not some cosmic entity that happened to resemble humanity's features. The Supreme Hunter was a woman, clearly and unmistakably of Earth origin, with dark skin, intelligent brown eyes, and graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked to be perhaps 50 years old by human standards, with the kind of lived-in face that spoke of decades of experience and careful thought. The silence that followed this revelation was so complete that the chamber's atmospheric processors seemed deafening in comparison. Delegates who had spent eons fearing the Supreme Hunter now found themselves staring at what appeared to be an ordinary middle-aged human woman. "My name," she said in a voice that was now clearly feminine and entirely human, "is Dr. Sarah Chun. I am Marcus's great-aunt, a xenobiologist by training, and, until 37 years ago, a professor at the University of Toronto." The casual nature of her introduction only added to the surreal quality of the moment. Here was the galaxy's ultimate predator, the being whose very name struck terror into the hearts of entire civilizations, introducing herself as if she were at an academic conference. Marcus smiled at the shocked expressions surrounding them. "Humanity has always been very good at playing roles," he said conversationally. "My great-aunt, in particular, has a talent for dramatic presentations." Dr. Chun, the Supreme Hunter, laughed, and the sound was warm and entirely ordinary. "What can I say? 30 years of being the galaxy's boogeyman has given me a flair for the theatrical." Commander Thraxis was the first to find his voice, though it came out as little more than a strangled whisper. "Impossible. The Supreme Hunter has existed for millennia. The legends speak of beings destroyed across eons of time." "The legends," Dr. Chen replied with a slight smile, "are remarkably susceptible to creative editing. When you've been isolated from galactic civilization for as long as we were, you have plenty of time to research the local mythology and figure out how to make it work for you." She gestured, and her armor began to retract. Not mechanical armor, after all, but some form of advanced nanotechnology that flowed like liquid shadow as it withdrew into what appeared to be a simple black jumpsuit underneath. When humans first achieved faster-than-light travel and encountered galactic civilization, we faced a problem. We were technologically inferior, numerically insignificant, and completely inexperienced in interstellar politics. Any direct approach would have resulted in our immediate conquest or elimination. Counselor Veltar's scales had locked into a pattern that indicated cognitive overload. But the Hunter's activities, the eliminated threats, the interventions in galactic conflicts, all real, Dr. Chun confirmed. But perhaps not quite what you assumed they were. Tell me, in all the stories you've heard about the Supreme Hunter, how many involved the destruction of peaceful species? How many targeted beings who were simply trying to live their lives in harmony with their neighbors? The question hung in the air as the various delegates tried to recall the legends they had grown up with. Ambassador Zekthar's compound eyes darted around nervously as he processed the implications. "The Hunter only struck at aggressors," he said slowly. "Species that were expanding through conquest. beings who threaten the stability of entire regions. Exactly, Marcus interjected. For 30 years, my great-aunt has been systematically eliminating the galaxy's worst actors. Pirates, slavers, genocidal regimes, species that gained power through the suffering of others. She became the monster that hunted monsters. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. The beauty of the approach was that no one questioned it. The galaxy was so accustomed to powerful beings ruling through fear and violence that they simply assumed the supreme hunter was another predator. They never considered that the hunter might have been protecting the very species they dismissed as weak and irrelevant. The holographic display that still filled the center of the chamber began to change, showing new data that painted an even more shocking picture. System after system appeared, each one marked with the same symbol, a stylized human hand extended in a gesture of protection. Every species that was threatened by the galactic power's expansion found themselves mysteriously protected. Dr. Chun explained as the display updated. Pirates would disappear. Slaver fleets would vanish. Aggressive neighbors would suddenly become very interested in peaceful coexistence. President Mortheke leaned forward in his ancient chair, his voice barely above a whisper. You've been manipulating galactic politics for 3 decades. Guiding, Marcus corrected gently, nudging things in a more positive direction, creating space for cooperation to flourish instead of conflict. But the technology, protested Nyx of the Silicon Collective, his crystalline form flickering with confusion. The hunter's abilities are beyond anything in our databases. The instantaneous travel, the immunity to weapons, the capacity to appear and disappear at will. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. That brings us to the part of the story that you're really not going to like, she said. The technology you've observed isn't beyond galactic capabilities. It's beyond your understanding of galactic capabilities. She gestured again, and her jumpsuit began to shift and change. Panels opened to reveal intricate technological systems that were clearly far advanced beyond anything the Council species possessed. But more shocking than the technology itself was what it revealed about its origins. This isn't human technology, Dr. Chen continued. It's Vorhack technology, and hegemony technology, and warcast technology, and silicon collective technology, and the innovations of about 40 other species that I've encountered over the past 3 decades. The implications of her words hit the delegates like a physical blow. The Supreme Hunter hadn't been using some mysterious cosmic power. She had been using their own technologies combined and improved in ways that none of them had imagined possible. You've been stealing from us, Zekthar accused, his mandibles clicking with outrage. Borrowing, Dr. Chun corrected with amusement, though I suppose the distinction might seem academic from your perspective. The wonderful thing about being the galaxy's most feared entity is that people tend to abandon their equipment very quickly when they think you're approaching. Marcus stepped forward to stand beside his great-aunt. What the Council species never understood is that technology isn't power. Knowledge is power. You've all been so focused on guarding your individual advantages that you never considered what might be possible if someone combined all of your innovations. The display shifted again, showing technical schematics that made several of the delegates gasp in recognition. Vorhack stealth systems integrated with hegemony energy manipulation. Warcast weaponry enhanced by silicon collective computing power. Zenithian meditation techniques used to improve reaction times and decision-making processes. Each of your species excels in particular areas, Dr. Chen explained. The Vorhack have unparalleled stealth technology. The hegemony has mastered energy manipulation on a subatomic level. The Warcast builds weapons that can crack planets. The Silicon Collective processes information faster than organic brains can comprehend. She paused, letting her words sink in. But none of you share. None of you cooperate. None of you even consider that your enemies might have innovations worth adopting. You're all so convinced of your individual superiority that you've blinded yourselves to the potential for genuine advancement. Humans, on the other hand, Marcus continued, have never had the luxury of assuming we were the best at anything. We've always known we were behind, so we've always been willing to learn, to adapt, to take the best ideas from wherever we found them and make them better. Dr. Chen's jumpsuit had fully transformed now, revealing a technological marvel that incorporated elements from dozens of different species' designs. This suit represents the combined knowledge of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Not copied, not stolen, but understood, integrated, and improved upon. Elder Mordun of the Zenithian monks spoke with a voice full of wonder and concern. You have become more than the sum of our parts. We have become what the galaxy could be if its species worked together instead of against each other, Dr. Chen replied. And that's the real threat we represent to the established order. The delegates were beginning to understand the true magnitude of what they faced. Humanity hadn't just built a large alliance. They had created a technological synthesis that surpassed anything any individual species had achieved. By combining the innovations of dozens of civilizations, they had effectively leapfrogged millions of years of development. Commander Thraxis found his voice again, though it carried a note of desperate confusion. Why reveal this now? You could have continued the deception indefinitely. Because the deception has served its purpose, Marcus replied. 30 years ago, the galaxy was locked in a cycle of expansion through conquest. Species were being eliminated on a regular basis. Entire civilizations were being wiped out for the crime of being in the way of someone more powerful. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. The Supreme Hunter legend gave us the ability to intervene without revealing humanity's hand. We could eliminate the worst threats while allowing our legitimate diplomatic efforts to build connections and alliances. But now, Marcus continued, we're strong enough that we don't need to hide. The human alliance represents the single largest concentration of cooperative species in galactic history. Our combined technological base exceeds anything any single empire has achieved. And most importantly, we've proven that there's an alternative to the traditional model of galactic expansion. The holographic display updated one final time, showing the current state of galactic politics from humanity's perspective. The traditional powers, the Vorthak Imperium, the Hegemony, the War Caste, the Silicon Collective, appeared as isolated islands of aging technology and stagnant thinking. Around them, the human alliance glowed like a vast network of interconnected stars, growing larger and more complex with each passing year. The choice before you is simple, Dr. Chen announced with the authority she had commanded as the Supreme Hunter. Evolve or become irrelevant. Join the future or be left behind by it. Counselor Veltar's scales had shifted to a deep purple color that indicated both fear and fascination. What exactly are you proposing? Marcus and Dr. Chen exchanged another look before Marcus stepped forward to answer. We're proposing the end of the Galactic Council as it currently exists, he said with calm finality. This body was designed to mediate between competing empires, to manage the endless conflicts that arise when every species believes conquest is the only path to security. But what if conquest isn't necessary? Dr. Chun asked rhetorically. What if security comes from cooperation? What if strength comes from unity rather than domination? The two humans stood together in the center of the chamber, the legendary Supreme Hunter and the supposedly primitive diplomat, and somehow they commanded more respect and attention than all the ancient empires combined. We're offering you a chance to be part of something unprecedented, Marcus concluded. A galactic civilization built on mutual respect, shared knowledge, and cooperative development. A future where no species needs to fear extinction because they lack the military power to defend themselves. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and terror. Every delegate in the chamber understood that they were being offered a choice that would define the next era of galactic history. The Age of Empires was ending. The question now was whether they would help build what came next, or whether they would fight a losing battle to preserve a dying order. As they contemplated their decision, one thing had become absolutely clear. The galaxy would never be the same again. The silence in the council chamber stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Every delegate sat frozen in their seats, trying to process the magnitude of the choice before them. The old order, which had seemed as permanent as the stars themselves, was crumbling before their eyes. In its place, humanity offered something that seemed both impossibly idealistic and undeniably powerful. Finally, it was President Morthe K who broke the silence. The ancient Zinthri had presided over galactic politics for 3 centuries, had seen the rise and fall of dozens of smaller civilizations, and had managed the delicate balance of power between the major species for longer than most beings had been alive. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of that experience. "What you propose," he said slowly, "requires a fundamental restructuring of galactic civilization. Trade agreements, territorial boundaries, resource allocations, military deployments. Everything would need to be renegotiated from the ground up." Marcus nodded respectfully to the elderly president. "Yes, it would. But consider the alternative. The current system is based on fear, intimidation, and the constant threat of warfare. How much of your civilization's resources are devoted to military spending? How much potential is wasted on weapons instead of exploration, art, science, and quality of life?" Dr. Chin stepped forward, her appearance now completely human and unintimidating, yet somehow still commanding absolute attention. "Over the past 30 years, I've had the opportunity to observe galactic civilization from a unique perspective. Do you know what I've seen? Brilliant species trapped by their own success." She gestured toward the Vorthak delegation. The Vorthak possess the most advanced stealth technology in the galaxy, but they use it primarily for military surprise attacks. Imagine what they could accomplish if that technology were used for scientific observation, for studying dangerous phenomena without disturbing them, for exploring regions of space too hazardous for conventional vessels. Ambassador Zekthar's compound eyes focused on the human woman with something that might have been grudging curiosity. "You speak of our technology as if it were yours to redistribute. I speak of it as if it were a gift to the galaxy that you've been hoarding," Dr. Chin replied without heat. "The hegemony has mastered energy manipulation to a degree that borders on the miraculous. You can restructure matter at the subatomic level, create elements that don't exist naturally, manipulate the fundamental forces of physics. Konstler scales shifted nervously. Such knowledge is dangerous in the wrong hands, and beneficial in the right ones," Marcus interjected. "The human alliance includes 17 species whose homeworlds are dying due to stellar instability, atmospheric degradation, or resource depletion. Hegemony energy manipulation technology could save literally trillions of lives." Dr. Chun continued her circuit of the chamber, addressing each delegation in turn. "The Warcast has developed defensive technologies that could protect entire star systems from cosmic disasters. The Silicon Collective processes information with a speed and accuracy that could solve computational problems that have plagued organic species for millennia. The Zenithian monks have achieved a level of mental discipline and clarity that could revolutionize how we approach complex decision-making." Elder Mordun's forearms gestured in what humans had learned was a sign of thoughtful consideration. "You speak of sharing knowledge as if it were a simple matter. But knowledge is power, and power shared is power diminished. That's the old thinking," Marcus said gently. "The zero-sum mentality that assumes one being's gain must be another's loss. But knowledge isn't like territory or resources. It grows when it's shared, not diminishes." To demonstrate his point, Marcus activated his data pad again. The holographic display that appeared showed a complex three-dimensional model that none of the delegates recognized. "This is a theoretical framework for faster-than-light communication that our xenobiologists developed in collaboration with Threnodai mathematicians, Kalari physicists, and former Outer Rim pirates who understood subspace mechanics better than they had any right to," Marcus explained. "None of those species could have developed this technology on their own, but Together, they've created something that could revolutionize galactic civilization. Dr. Chin nodded approvingly. Instantaneous communication across galactic distances would eliminate many of the problems that currently plague interstellar politics. Misunderstandings due to delayed information. Conflicts that escalate because diplomatic messages take weeks to arrive. The isolation that makes species suspicious of each other's motives. Commander Thraxis leaned forward in his chair, his scarred face showing interest despite his obvious skepticism. This communication technology, does it actually work? We'll know in about 6 months when the first tests are scheduled to begin, Marcus replied. But the theoretical foundation is solid, and the preliminary results are promising. 6 months, Nyx of the Silicon Collective mused, his crystalline form pulsing with rapid calculations. To develop technology that our greatest minds have been pursuing for millennia. Because your greatest minds have been working in isolation, Dr. Chun pointed out. Each species pursuing the same goals independently, reinventing the same solutions, making the same mistakes over and over again. The human alliance eliminates that redundancy by pooling knowledge and coordinating research efforts. The implications of what they were hearing began to sink in for the assembled delegates. Not only had humanity built the largest political alliance in galactic history, but they had also created the most efficient research and development network anyone had ever imagined. While the traditional powers have been focused on guarding their secrets and maintaining their individual advantages, humans have been systematically surpassing all of them through cooperation. President Morth K. spoke again, his ancient voice heavy with the realization of how dramatically the galaxy had changed without his knowledge. You have not simply challenged our political structure. You have made it obsolete. Not obsolete, Marcus corrected gently. Evolved. The Galactic Council could serve as the foundation for something much greater than it currently is. Instead of managing conflicts between competing empires, it could coordinate the peaceful development of galactic civilization. Instead of mediating disputes over territory and resources, it could facilitate the sharing of knowledge and the cooperative exploration of the universe. Dr. Chin's expression grew more serious as she addressed the heart of the matter. But that transformation requires a choice from each of you. You can continue to operate under the old system, maintaining your empires through force, hoarding your technologies, viewing every other species as a potential threat or resource to be exploited. Or you can join us in building something better. And if we refuse? Counselor Veltar asked, her scales locked in a pattern that indicated she already suspected the answer. Marcus and Dr. Chun exchanged one of their meaningful looks before Marcus responded. Then, you continue as you always have, but in an increasingly isolated and irrelevant way. The human alliance will continue to grow, continue to attract species that prefer cooperation to conquest. Eventually, you'll find yourselves surrounded by civilizations that no longer recognize your authority or fear your military might. You're threatening us with obsolescence, Commander Thraxis rumbled, his hand moving unconsciously toward his ceremonial weapons. We're offering you evolution, Dr. Chin corrected. The threat of obsolescence comes from your own refusal to adapt to changing circumstances. She gestured, and her technological suit shifted again, displaying real-time data streams from across the galaxy. This is happening whether you participate or not. Every day, more species join the Alliance. Every week, new technologies are developed through cooperative research. Every month, the gap between what we can accomplish together and what any individual empire can achieve on its own grows larger. The data was undeniable. Resource production in Alliance space was increasing exponentially as species shared efficiency improvements. Scientific discoveries were accelerating as research efforts were coordinated rather than duplicated. Even cultural development was flourishing as different civilizations shared art, philosophy, and social innovations. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus added, quality of life in Alliance space is improving at an unprecedented rate. When species don't need to devote 70% of their resources to military defense, They can invest in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and exploration. From competition to cooperation. From isolation to integration. From fear to hope. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. And that's why this choice is so important. It's not just about trade agreements or territorial boundaries. It's about what kind of galaxy we want to live in. President Morthike slowly rose from his chair, his ancient joints protesting the movement. I have presided over this council for 3 centuries, he said with quiet dignity. I have seen wars that consumed entire star systems. I have witnessed the extinction of dozens of species. I have mediated disputes that seemed impossible to resolve. He looked around the chamber, his gaze taking in each delegate in turn. And in all that time, I have never seen anything like what you have accomplished. Never imagined that such cooperation was possible on a galactic scale. The elderly president paused, seeming to gather his strength for what he was about to say. But I am old, and old minds often resist new ideas out of habit rather than wisdom. This decision is too important to be made by someone who may be too set in his ways to see clearly. He turned to address Marcus and Dr. Chin directly. I propose that the council recess for 1 galactic standard month to allow each delegation to consult with their home governments and consider the implications of what you have revealed. When we reconvene, we will vote on whether to accept your proposal for a new galactic order. Marcus nodded respectfully. That seems reasonable, but I should point out that the human alliance will continue to grow during that time. The choice you're making is not between the current situation and our proposal. It's between joining us now or try to catch up later. Understood, President Morthike replied. And I suspect that when we reconvene, the galaxy will be a very different place than it is today. As the delegates began to file out of the chamber, each lost in their own thoughts about the momentous decision before them, Dr. Chun and Marcus remained in the center of the dais, watching the beings who had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant struggle with the reality of their changed circumstances. How many do you think will join us? Dr. Chin asked quietly. Marcus considered the question carefully. The Zenithians will vote yes. They've always been interested in philosophical evolution. The Silicon Collective will probably join once they finish calculating the resource allocation advantages. The others? He shrugged. Pride is a powerful force. Some of them may prefer to maintain their independence, even if it means becoming irrelevant. And if they choose to oppose us actively, Marcus's expression grew serious. Then, they'll discover that the Supreme Hunter isn't the only human who's been underestimated. Dr. Chin smiled at that, but her expression was tinged with sadness. I hope it doesn't come to that. This galaxy has seen enough violence. It has, Marcus agreed. But if that's what it takes to build a better future, then that's what we'll do. As the last of the delegates departed, the 2 humans stood alone in the vast chamber that had once been the center of galactic power. In a few weeks, it might be the foundation of something entirely new, a coordinating body for the greatest cooperative venture in galactic history. Or it might be the last gathering of a dying order, clinging to power they no longer possessed in a galaxy that had moved beyond their understanding. Either way, the age of humanity had truly begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The young species from the third rock orbiting an unremarkable yellow star had done something that none of the galaxy's ancient civilizations had ever imagined possible. They had proven that there was a better way to reach for the stars than conquest and fear. And in doing so, they had changed everything. The Supreme Hunter was no longer a legend to be feared in the darkness between stars. She was Dr. Sarah Chun, xenobiologist, protector of the innocent, and guardian of a dream that had become reality. The primitive human diplomat was no longer a source of mockery and amusement. He was Marcus Chun, architect of the greatest alliance in galactic history, and herald of a new age of cooperation. And humanity itself was no longer the galaxy's joke. They were its hope.